Hello everyone, welcome, and today we are going to be making a little cottage next to Riverside. We are going to be using a mirror for this project. You don't have to use a mirror if you don't want to. I just found this very cheap one at the dollar store and wanted to use it in some way. I thought the reflectiveness of the mirror would work well with water, which is why I included the little stream. So to begin, I am using cardboard in order to build up our riverbanks. I am using the back side of the mirror in order to get the right shape for our land. Then I cut progressively smaller and smaller pieces in order to build up hills on the corners of our plots of land. This is also when I begin building up the little waterfall that's going to be producing our little stream. To make this product, you just do about 50% dirt, 50% Elmer's glue. You could probably use other glues as well, I'd imagine, as long as they're liquid glues. But make sure your ratio to dirt is always more glue than dirt. You want to make sure that it's nice and sticky. And depending on the different dirt you use, if you're using a very dry dirt, the dirt might soak up more glue, so you might have to add more glue. If you're using a dirt that was kind of like mine, where it was already a little bit wet on the wet side, then you might not have to use as much glue. Now, I'm not saying you should or shouldn't add water to your dirt, but I'd probably vote against it because I wouldn't want to water down the glue that I'm using. So just try to find naturally slightly damper dirt rather than soaking your dirt, otherwise your glue might not be as concentrated as you'd like it to be. Now, as I wait for this to dry, and it's going to take a while to dry, I would recommend letting it sit there for at least a few hours, if not a whole day, to dry. But while we wait, I'm going to start working on our cottage. Now, this little cottage, there's really not much to it. I'm just cutting out 4 little walls, kind of gingerbread house style out of cardboard. Now, I ended up making my house a little bit on the big side. Depending on how yours looks and if you're doing the same scaling as I am, I would recommend doing a slightly smaller house than what I have done. I probably should have measured it out, or at least, made sure that it kind of fit on the platform that I was choosing to make. And it does, it fits, but it is very snug on there, and it's right up against the stream. So if I had to redo this project, I'd say I'd probably make the house smaller. But aside from that, I think it turns out great. This little house, I put a little chimney on top. All you gotta do is make your little box and then cut it at an angle. Alright, the next thing I'm going to make is a tree. I'm just going to take a couple wires that are roughly the same length and twist them together. Now, the wires I'm using are really thick, strong wires, so I had to bend them with a set of pliers in order to keep them all still and together, which took quite a while and was quite difficult. But eventually, I got them all to twist together. So the next part is just kind of placing things where I kind of want them to be, placing the tree over on the side and placing the cottage right there in the little opening. As you can see, the cottage is a little bit big compared to everything else. but I figure it's good enough, so I begin to texture it with a whole bunch of rocks. By just gluing the rocks onto the side of the wall, I can make this really nice rock texture. Yes, it's super tedious, and yes, it's very flimsy and fragile, and yes, it took me forever to do. This took me well over 4 hours to do, and I'd say half of that time was just dedicated to gluing these little rocks onto the side of the walls. It was around this time that I decided this house needed a little bit more texture than just stone. So I thought about making little beams on the corners made out of wood. Now, I don't know anything about construction or anything like that, but the wooden beams definitely make it look a little bit better, breaking up a lot of that rocky texture. I also decided that the window and door frame should also be made out of wood, just to break them up and separate them a little bit from the rocks. So if you are planning to use this type of texture for a wall or a house or anything like that, keep in mind that a lot of rocks actually have a side that tends to be flatter than the other sides. So usually it'll have like 3 round sides and then 1 sort of flat side. And so you want to make sure you're always using that flat side against, your surface. That way it has the most surface area to grab on. Another strategy is just dumping a whole bunch of glue onto your surface and then sticking the rocks on. And of course that works too, but I feel like it's a little less organized and a little bit messier. There's a lot more gaps sometimes. Of course, with that method, you could always come back later and shove in little tiny rocks into the gaps. And that's also kind of what I do later on, is I go back and I shove a whole bunch of rocks into the tiny little gaps that I missed around everywhere. So for this final 4th wall, I eventually gave up on keeping the house on the platform and decided to take it off and just do it in my hand to make it nice and quick and fast, because I was getting sick of placing rocks at this point. Also, I got super lazy at this point. I was left with a lot of tiny little rocks, and not very many medium-sized rocks. Instead of going outside and grabbing some more rocks, I decided to just use the tiny rocks. You might notice that this last side has a lot of tiny little rocks compared to all the other sides that have a lot of well-balanced medium to big rocks, but this side is just only small rocks basically. It doesn't look bad necessarily, but if you're looking at it and you're looking at the other sides, it is a little bit noticeable. So keep that in mind when you are building a house like this. Try to keep a decent ratio of medium to small on all sides of your walls. For this next part, I accidentally forgot to hit record when I was making the roof. But it's super simple. All you do is get a strip of the colored tile you want and make evenly spaced cuts. Then take a small round surface, I am using a paintbrush, and use it to bend each of the tiles to make them slightly rounded. Then just glue each of the layers on top of one another, and there you go, you got your roof. I quickly fill in the gap between the roof and the stone texture. I didn't bring the stone texture all the way up to the roof just yet because I wasn't sure exactly how I was going to do the roof until just then. I also quickly did the chimney because I forgot to texture the chimney. This is when I start hopping around and kind of just doing whatever I feel like doing in the moment. Right now, I am adding a bit of moss into the stone texture. Just little strands right between all the cracks and crevices. And also a little bit on the ground around the house and stuff. I also begin adding some to the tree, which in hindsight I should have painted the tree brown before I started adding the leaves and textures. After adding a few of the leaves, I realized my mistake and begin painting the trunk. Painting wire is actually sort of difficult, as the paint does not want to stay on the wire because it's so smooth, and you also have to add multiple layers or else you might see the silver poking through. Once that is done, I leave the tree alone to dry as I add a whole bunch more moss onto the base of the floor. I also begin adding these other plants that I found outside. They're already dead, which means they can't get much deader, so they're perfect for this kind of decoration, because I know they won't wilt any further than they already have. Alright, so for this next part, we are going to work on our waterfall. So this is not my idea, it's actually this channel's idea. Basically, all you do is you take a piece of plastic, a rounded piece of plastic. So maybe from a bottle or a milk jug. I took mine from a milk jug. And you're going to take your hot glue and you're just going to make these little squiggles down the plastic. Once those squiggles dry, you make smaller squiggles between the squiggles and you just keep going until it's covered in squiggles. And now you have a believable water texture. So forgive the camera movement, I had a very hard time getting the right angle of this on camera. All I did was glue the waterfall on and then I made some ripples down the water stream using the hot glue gun. I also added 2 stones in the water because I thought that'd be a fun little detail. And now again, I am stealing that channel's idea. By using the hot glue and pulling it apart while it's still kind of warm, you get this white little clump of glue that works well as a little foam at the end of your waterfall. Now, this is the part where I went, oh shoot! This giant gap between the land and my mirror is really ugly. And so I went back through and I added another layer of cardboard. Well, actually, I added 2 to 3 layers of cardboard depending on the places, and added those between the mirror and my little cabin, because originally there was this big gap between the mirror and the cardboard, and it just did not look right. I think it looks so much better now. It did shrink my stream down just a tiny bit, but I think that's okay. It still looks nice and big enough. And actually, it does help with the cabin. Since the cabin's really big, now there's that extra little few steps between the door and the stream, and it makes it look a lot more believable. Now, for a while, I start adding a lot more plants and a lot more foliage on the tree and also around the surrounding land and on the little waterfall and stuff to add that extra bit of plants and life onto this build. Now, for the final addition, I am going to add smoke into the chimney. Now, how am I going to do that? I am going to use cotton balls. Unfortunately, I don't have any black cotton balls, but I do have gray. And later on, I can paint it black so it's a little darker. Basically, all I do is I take a wire, put it through the chimney, and then I just glue the cotton balls onto the wire. I gently pull on the cotton balls to make sure that there's nothing loose that could fall off later, and then I repeat the process by continuously gluing on cotton over and over until I think I have a thick enough smoke. This is when I start to paint. I paint the doors and the windows black, and then I do a watered down black over the entire building, which I will soon quickly regret. When I began doing the watered down black over the front of the house, this happened. I forgot one very important thing. Glue and water do not mix. Do not water down your glue. Okay, guys? It's not a good idea. The entire front of the house basically fell off. But luckily I was a lot more gentle with the other sides, and so only like one pebble fell off of the other sides because I was super gentle and quick about watering down the other sides. But the front of the house completely fell apart after a few minutes because I just watered it down way too much. So, if you're going to do a house like this, and you want to water it down, either shade your rocks beforehand, or water it down very, very lightly. But aside from that, painting was pretty simple. I did struggle a little bit trying to get the paint between all the little cardboard cracks, but eventually I got through most of them. If you guys have gotten this far in the video, remember to like, comment, subscribe so I know to make more of these videos. And if you have any ideas for what the next video could be about, maybe hit me up in the comments and I'll try to get to them as soon as I can. Now for the reveal.